مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. أخيرا وبعد 3 سنوات من انتخابات رئاسية لا يزال البعض يشكك بنتيجتهم. أدلى الناخبون في ولاية أيوا بالأصوات الأولى في انتخابات 2024. كان الطقس متجمدا مما أقنع كثيرين بالبقاء في منازلهم، ولكن للمرة الثانية أرسلت الولايات الزراعية في وسط أمريكا رسالة مهمة إلى بقية البلاد. وكما كان متوقعا كان الفائز هو دونالد ترامب، والذي أظهر أنه يمسك بزمام الأمور في الحزب الجمهوري، إلى أنه يواجه بالإضافة إلى المشاكل القانونية في ولايات عديدة، مشاكل سياسية أيضا، خاصة من سفيراته السابقة إلى الأمم المتحدة نيكي هيلي. ماذا تعلمنا من أيوا؟ وما هو تأثير النتائج على جبهة القتال الرئيسية التالية في ولاية نيوهامشير؟ وما هو تأثير المنافسة الجمهورية على حملة جو بايدن لولاية ثانية في البيت الأبيض؟ لمناقشة السياسة بعد انتخابات أيوا التمهيدية يسرني أن أستضيف مراقبين سياسيين متميزين: نورمان أورنستين، أليكس كانجيتانو، ودانيال ليبمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Some voters, not many, but some have already cast some ballots in the first tests of what is likely to be the longest election in American history. Let's take a look at the first big test that was in the state of Iowa and what it means with our panel of political experts, Alex Gangitano, Daniel Lippman, and Norm Ornstein. Thank you all for joining us today. So, Alex, what happened in the great state of Iowa?
Yeah, so of course that was, the first caucus that we've seen of this Republican primary, and former President Trump outright won, and very quickly. We were all ready to watch the results throughout the night, and they came out extremely fast, showing that he won decisively in that state, which was to be expected. He's been polling consistently high for months, over the past year, really, amongst the other Republican rivals. And so he really solidified his huge position as the first of the Republican primary candidates. And then former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley came in third. So it's kind of the results that we were expecting. I think the only big, or not big surprise, but somewhat surprise, is just how fast this was called and how quickly it came out for former President Trump.
So, Daniel, just a little bit of perspective. If you go back in time a bit, in 2016, Donald Trump came in second to Ted Cruz. In 2020, as the incumbent, he got 97%. Now, in the third time, he got about half that, just about 50%. That's a pretty wide swing. What does all that tell us?
Well, it tells us that his grip on the Republican Party has really only gotten stronger over time. He getting 97% a few years ago is to be expected as the incumbent president, but he is no longer the president. And there was a lot of skepticism in the Republican Party early on in 2015 and 2016 about Donald Trump, about whether he was a real Republican, about whether he could win. And some of that skepticism remains, but he definitely has a chokehold of support among the working class voters, especially, and even some of the college educated voters in Iowa and other states around the country who think that he has a good chance of beating Joe Biden, even though he has those 91 felony charges against him.
So, Norm, please help explain to our viewers, why does Donald Trump have such a hold on the votes of Iowa Republicans and of Republicans more generally?
At one level, it's a puzzle, Rob. This is a man now on trial again for defaming a woman who a jury found he had sexually assaulted, indeed raped, E. Jean Carroll, and he will probably be liable for large damages. He has another trial just concluded where he is likely to lose his ability to do business in New York. He has, as Daniel said, 91 felony charges against him, with multiple cases involving inciting an insurrection and stealing and holding on to and obstructing justice over the most highly classified documents. And we now have learned that he took in $8 million from China and other foreign countries, and he said, yeah, I gave them something for it. So why would Republicans stick with him? I mean, frankly, we have to look at this through the prism not of a normal political party, but a kind of cult. And he is a cult leader. And one of the other things that's interesting from the Iowa results is from the entrance polls that were done, only about 6% of those who supported Trump believe that Joe Biden actually won the election. So we have people who have consumed social media, tribal media, and everything that Donald Trump has said, and they view him as almost a god who's come down, to save the country and the world, but who are getting a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and that's, a very troubling element of American society right now.
Daniel, you referred a moment ago to Trump's legal problems. Norm just mentioned them again. Do they help him? Do they hurt him? Are they irrelevant? What's your assessment?
Well, he's actually only grown in support among his primary voters since he got charged with more crimes. It's just a very bizarre world where Trump gets more popular because people feel like the establishment is attacking him with these charges. And so far it's helped him. And I think people still, in terms of the support of Trump, a lot of middle class and working class Americans feel like Washington and the establishment has left them behind. They don't care about them. They're facing lives that are tougher than they would have liked. And so they feel like Washington elite are in their own bubble and they are selfish. And so that is why they feel like Trump can be their savior. But in the general election, some suburban voters, independent swing voters may not want to elect a felon into the Oval Office. And so that could pose a big challenge.
So actually, just on that theme, Alex, when trying to parse the numbers in Iowa, it's an exceedingly small group of voters who have an outsized influence on the way the world looks at the victor in that state, isn't it?
That's right. I mean, the political focus on Iowa is always a fascinating one, considering how small of a demographic of voters that is, but also it shows just momentum really going into the rest of the election cycle. But the former president had that momentum already. He was already polling so far and above everybody else that momentum's always been there. Like Norm and Daniel were talking about too, he's not losing supporters over these felony charges so far. And that's just been huge for him continuing his political career and wanting to get back into the White House. I think once we get into these other states, that's really when these other candidates can try to get above him or try to tell voters, I'm the person who can beat Joe Biden, not necessarily former President Trump. And we look at the history of these caucuses, President Biden didn't win until he got to the South Carolina primary. He, didn't win in Iowa. And so it's not necessarily always indicative of a definite victory, but I think considering the months of polling that we've seen from former President Trump and the supporters that are not losing their admiration for them, shows that he definitely has that momentum, and Iowa just solidified that for him.
We're going to move on to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Super Tuesday in just a minute after the break. Please stay with us here on Dakhel, Washington. Again, my guests today include Alex Gangitano. Alex is White House reporter at The Hill, where she was previously the Heard on the Hill and lobbying reporter. Earlier in her career, she was a staff writer for CQ Roll Call. Also with us is Daniel Lipman. Daniel covers Washington politics for Politico, where he also authors the social data section of Politico's New York Playbook. Previously, he was a reporter with the Wall Street Journal in New York. And with us, I'm delighted to have Norman Ornstein. Norm is Emeritus Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and one of America's wisest experts on politics, Congress, and the presidency. Norm is a contributing editor and columnist for National Journal and The Atlantic magazines, and an election analyst for BBC News and South Carolina before the run-up to Super Tuesday. What can we expect as we look out at these important races?
With South Carolina, that is Nikki Haley's home state. She was governor there, but so far, according to the polls, Trump has a strong lock on that state. So it's going to be interesting to see if she can transform any momentum she has from the early states to South Carolina. But it's a traditionally, conservative religious state. And it's always interesting to see religious and evangelical voters vote for someone who is divorced a few times, has had a number of sexual assault allegations against him, which he denies. And so with South Carolina, it's kind of a indication that not all politics is local anymore, because that state's voters don't have a affiliation as closely with Nikki Haley, who is the UN ambassador since that time. And so if she had been governor last month, then maybe that could help her.
Norm, while voters in these various states are going to have their say, a number of people in Washington will have a very important say. The members of the Supreme Court, who have some key judgments to make about the candidacy of Donald Trump. What's going on that front?
So we have several states. There is in the American Constitution an amendment, the 14th Amendment. This was enacted, around the time of the Civil War, that basically says if you participate in or are a part of an insurrection or anything that is traitorous to the Constitution, you are ineligible to run for office. Under the 14th Amendment and Section 3 of that amendment, we have seen a couple of states, Colorado and now Maine, where the Colorado courts have said that Donald Trump is not eligible to run in the Republican primary there, and then by extension in the general election. In Maine, it was the Secretary of State, the top election official, who ruled in the same way. This has gone right to the Supreme Court, and they're going to have a very difficult time with this. Obviously, if the Supreme Court says the language of the 14th Amendment is clear, and these are people who have professed, the conservative justices, 6 of them, that they hold fealty to the language of the Constitution. That's what's most important. They are originalists. Then they will say Trump is not eligible to run. But the political consequences of that are enormous. So most observers, including a more liberal one, Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post, believes that they will find a way out of this one. We're going to have other rulings by the court, including some that will have an impact more broadly on where the electorate is. I'd want to make one other point about New Hampshire, though, Rob. The governor of New Hampshire, Republican Chris Sununu, widely considered to be a more pragmatic figure, was asked whether he would support Donald Trump, whom he has criticized pretty harshly in the past, if Trump were the nominee. And he said, of course I will. I'll support the Republican nominee. At the same time, Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, who ran briefly for the nomination and had said some really harsh things about Donald Trump, also said he would support Trump. So did Marco Rubio, who was famously slimed by Trump when they were both running in 2016 as Little Marco, and who has said in the past that Trump is unfit for office, has just endorsed Trump. That's a measure of how much this is Donald Trump's party, whatever he does. When Trump said famously, I could shoot somebody in broad daylight on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a single vote. The fact is he could mow down Fifth Avenue with an AK-47 or an AR-15, and he wouldn't lose a single endorsement. That's where the party is right now.
He might lose the votes of the people he mows down, but other than that, yeah. All right. Look, we only have a few minutes left, but I think it's only fair that we say a few words about the Democrats. I mean, Norm, you were a young man when we last had presidential rematches. It's mid-1950s was the last time the two major party candidates went at each other twice in a row. What does that say about American politics today?
Well, Donald Trump is in his late 70s. Joe Biden is in his 80s. It tells us something about not just the United States, of course. We've seen this in many other countries where the pathways for younger people to move forward and capture top leadership positions are sometimes blocked. It's interesting that the Democrats in the House of Representatives managed to get past this remarkably. Their top three leaders, including the key one for Biden in South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, were all over 80, but they all voluntarily left the leadership and opened it up to much younger figures. But we can't leave this, Rob, without noting what's lurking in the background. Alex mentioned Robert Kennedy Jr. We have No Labels, an outfit that pledges to put up a third-party candidate and is extremely well-funded. Mostly, it appears, coming from Republican billionaires. We have Jill Stein, who had played a role in denying Hillary Clinton the presidency in 2016 as the Green Party candidate. We have Cornel West, who may pull some support from the far left. And those independent candidates, remember, we're talking about a general election where the key votes are in 7 states, and they're likely to be, Alex referred earlier to these suburban voters, suburban Republican and independent voters who make a difference in states that may be divided by 20, 30, 40,000 votes or even less. And if there's third-party candidates where Republicans don't like Biden, hate Trump, might have an alternative, that could make a real difference. We've got some really strange twists coming in our presidential politics down the road.
All right, so we only have about 45 seconds left. Dakhel, Washington is soon coming to a close after 19 years. It's going to be reborn in a different form, focused more on Middle East politics than our own crazy American politics. So before we go, one last big prediction from all of you. I'm going to remember it. We're going to re-air it next year. Who will stand on the inauguration platform here in Washington, January 2025, and take the oath of office? Daniel Lippman.
I think it's going to be President Biden, because there's a lot of people who are voicing protest votes to pollsters, but at the end of the day, they may not want the chaos of Donald Trump to return to Washington for 4 more years.
All right, that's Daniel. Alex Angitano.
I agree. I think President Biden can pull this one off. I think when it comes down to the general election in November, we're going to see suburban independents, women voters, these young people who are maybe protesting now come out and say, well, it's better than Trump and another 4 years of chaos.
All right. And you, Norm?
I agree, although I am nervous. And I will say as a final prediction, Rob, that if Donald Trump wins, Dakhel, Washington will merge with Russia Today.
Well, thank you, Norm. I appreciate that vote of confidence. Dos Vidania, Nostrovia. And look, I just want to thank all of you for outstanding contributions to our show. And we'll have you back in a different format somewhere down the road. But thank you both. Thank you all very much for joining us on Dakhel, Washington. In the last Democratic presidential administration under Barack Obama, the first term was focused on economics and healthcare, with the two key achievements being legislation to deal with the Great Recession and approval of the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. In the current Democratic administration, under Joe Biden, the first term also focused on economics, including passage of the huge Inflation Reduction Act, and another key social issue, education. Indeed, education is likely to emerge as a critical issue in the 2024 presidential vote. Unlike the national health care debate, which ended up being focused on creating a national health insurance program, there are many different aspects of the education debate. That fact alone makes it difficult for the administration to address. It often seems as though the president is playing a game called whack-a-mole, doing something about one piece of the national education puzzle, only to see another piece emerge as a big political issue. Here are just a few of the education issues that are roiling American politics. How students are admitted to schools. The Supreme Court just ruled that affirmative action, preferential treatment based on race to create a diverse student body, is not legal. That has been an earthquake for colleges and universities, with reverberations that are likely to spread across all aspects of our education system, even to selective kindergartens. How students pay for school. The Biden administration has tried very hard to respond to a critical voting group, youth, by sharply cutting back on student loan debt, a heavy burden that affects millions of Americans. But this too was shot down by federal courts, and the fight remains. 3, what students read in schools. All across the country, parents, often ill-informed about what is really happening with their kids and their classrooms, are speaking up and taking control of school boards in order to control what students read. Most frequently, books about race and gender are in their sights, sometimes leading to preposterous situations in which Huckleberry Finn and Anne Frank's diary are being banned from school libraries. This fight rages on in towns across the country. And 4, whether students even survive in school. Here, the issue is gun violence, a plague affecting rich schools and poor schools, schools in big cities and schools in rural areas alike. Unlike healthcare, an issue which lent itself to a national, if controversial, solution, the creation of a national health insurance system, education is usually a local issue, with the federal government playing a role, such as in student debt, but not the central role on any of these issues. For Biden, that's a challenge. He has to have views on everything, but he doesn't have the tools to execute on each item, opening him to criticism without the means to respond. So, as the election campaign begins to heat up, remember to keep each of these issues and the overall issue of education on your agenda. إلى هنا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كانت لديكم استفسارات أو تعليقات حول البرنامج، وخاصة فيما يتعلق بحملة الترشيح الجمهورية للرئاسة، أرجو التواصل معي على تويتر @InsideWashington أو مراسلتي مباشرة @RobSatloff. وحتى نلتقي في الأسبوع القادم، شكرا وإلى اللقاء.